Happy Halloween! I'm Roth
Hello.
Cornet.
How are you?
You know, it's weird because just a minute ago, a very scary man was sitting right there.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I didn't see anything.
You just missed him. You
Ah,
just missed him.
Him and Scoops McGee.
Michael Myers is back in theaters this weekend.
Yes, he is indeed.
And this is the long-awaited and anticipated Halloween sequel that actually divorces itself from the bulk of the franchise on
Yes.
paper and follows only John Carpenter's original Halloween, and picks up lo these many years later with Laurie Strode and Michael Myers and their continuing adventure together, I guess.
Sure.
In one way you could. But here's the interesting part is that for those that are Halloween fans that have seen most of the movies, you know, in the second film, basically it is revealed that Laurie is Michael's younger sister.
Yes.
Not the case in
Gone.
this film, as you may have heard or may not have heard. It was a random act of violence that has impacted the rest of her life, and she has been waiting all these years to get revenge and heal that trauma. Dan Murrell, festival darling, what did you think? Not that you're the festival darling.
This movie though was very
Yes,
much.
it was.
I want to say first of all that I think the original 1978 Halloween
Is a masterwork.
a masterwork.
Yes.
I think it is one of, this may sound weird, but one of the most important and influential American films ever made.
That doesn't sound weird at all. I think that's, wouldn't you guys all agree with that? Halloween is not only a masterwork, but it's a genre-defining horror film that led to many, many other films, and now this.
I love that movie.
So do
and
I.
I really do. Having said that, I did not judge this movie based on you have to live up to that, because that's a standard that I don't think any movie can reach. So get that out of the way first of all. Big fan of the original 1978 Halloween. Was not going to this movie expecting it to be that good, because it would be hard for any movie to be as good as that film is, in my opinion.
Agreed.
I did come into this movie wanting to love it. I wanted to love this movie so much. I was pumped, I was primed, I was ready, and I didn't. I don't know what it was. I kept waiting for it. The whole time the movie was, I kept waiting for it to grab me. I kept waiting for it to just sink its hooks into me, and it never really did. And there's a lot of reasons why that we'll go over, but I think the overall picture is that it's just very unfocused. It's a very unfocused film, and I think because of that,
My note taking.
it's yeah, exactly. Because of that, I think that it is never creates a sustained atmosphere. It never, for me, created sustained tension. It veers wildly in tone, often inside of a scene or from scene to scene. I don't think outside of Laurie and Strode, Jamie Lee Curtis, who I think is very good in this film, outside of her character, and in a way the character of Michael Myers, that they really do a good job of defining any of the other characters in this film. And so much of it just felt kind of half-baked to the rest of the film, that it just never congealed for me. I think there's some very strong elements to this film, which we'll talk about, but overall, it just did not come together for me. And I'm really sad to say that, and that's not to say that it's devoid of redeeming factors. I think there's several inside the film itself, but they did not come together into one whole for me.
So here's my take on Halloween. A couple of things that I think are interesting about this movie. There's a couple of swings that I think connect, and a number I think don't, because I think it a little bit gets away from itself. This is a movie that if you like what Halloween birthed, the 1978 Halloween birthed in
Yes.
terms of schlocky, fun, slasher movies, you may enjoy this movie to a degree. However, you also may not, and this is the reason. What those movies did was they presented very, very broad archetypes of characters. Scream turned this on its own head when it talked about the rules of horror movies and the rules of the final girl in surviving. Horror, as we know, is a genre. This is both in the written form, in mythology, and certainly in modern day horror films, is a very moralizing genre. It usually has a moral tale to tell. Halloween certainly did, and it birthed a whole genre of slasher films that certainly did, and people have written endless essays on the breakdowns of the morals of horror movies, and then they've been turned on their head since. What this movie does is it's fascinating because In the first Halloween, there's very few likable characters outside of Laurie. So you're really forced to root for her to survive. So it's a very visceral feeling when she does, of satisfaction. In this movie, they make Laurie far less likable, and they make all of the surrounding characters, they give them, David Gordon Green, director David Gordon Green gives each surrounding character a moment to actually connect to them on a human level. Some of the people that are killed, many of the people that are killed, which means the kills don't have the kind of euphoric, cartoonish distance and satisfaction that a horror movie like this would invite. It's too real.
Right.
And so by the time, but what's interesting about that is that it's turning the genre on its head in that way. And I think it's smartly done so that Michael Myers really becomes in a way that he hasn't been previously, a full-on villain that you're rooting against, which is fascinating. It's not that you're not rooting against Michael Myers in the other movies, but you're also charmed by him. You maybe don't so much like the characters that he's taking out. It's kind of a trope of the genre that this turns on its head, and I think it does that very well. It's also some very well-shot sequences.
The movie's well constructed.
Yeah.
In the sense, technically speaking, it's a well-made film, which gives it that kind of veneer that a lot of films in the genre don't have, and I appreciated that. I thought it was well constructed. There was a lot, technically there. But something that you said is talking about what Halloween spawned. This felt very much more to me a film that Halloween spawned, but not in a good way.
Not in a good way, yeah.
I think that you have to divorce yourself from a certain standpoint. When you're looking at this film, you have to look at it from one standpoint of taking yourself out of the connection to the first film and look at it as a film. If you take Michael Myers, your knowledge of the character Michael Myers out of this movie and just look at the first hour of it, it is a very generic slasher film. Mm-hmm. There's not much, and I mean down to the cheap jump scares, and I don't mean not all jump scares in my mind are cheap. I think there are jump scares, if they're well constructed and well executed, that are very effective.
Carpenter uses jump scares.
A lot of the horror films use jump scares in a very well constructed way. In Halloween and in other horror films, when I say cheap jump scares, I mean literally a character going like, "Ah, gotcha." That happens 4 or 5 times in this film. That for me is a hallmark of a cheap knockoff slasher film. That's a cheap jump scare. I think a lot of the kills there just didn't seem to be any art to it. There didn't, and not that it has to be, but when I'm looking at judging this film, what puts Halloween, the original, and what puts A Nightmare on Elm Street, and what puts the great slasher films a cut above the rest is that they are able to transcend those tropes.
Yes.
And I don't think this movie does that until it kind of starts to at the end. But by that point, you've gone through so much of just sort of genre-specific stuff that doesn't really stand out. And then the tone of it, at times with the gore and stuff,
it's very gory.
It's this movie borders sometimes on a grindhouse almost kind of vibe, which doesn't fit with the tone I think that they established with Michael Myers, which his vibe is much more kind of sinister and mysterious and waiting in the background, tension, and then you combine that tone with like the extreme gore grindhouse tone, and you combine that tone with like there's sometimes it'll cut to a scene and now you're watching just a flat out comedy. There's a scene with a babysitter and a kid. Yeah. You've never met this kid before, so you're not familiar with him. And then the babysitter you've met briefly in the film before, and then you cut and there's an interplay with them, and it plays well. The jokes are funny, but you're in a comedy. But then the next scene you're in a horror movie. Well, and then the next one it's a hardcore horror movie, but the next one it's a slow burn horror movie.
But that's one of the things that Halloween and the genre, the movies of that time did, that I think that horror movies now often don't do, which is that they do a horror movie of that time, and this isn't, by the way, I have a lot of issues with this Halloween, but was it took you on a roller coaster. Michael was sinister, but he was also really funny. You know, these kinds of looks and kind of the way that the characterization of the physicality of the character. Freddy Krueger is the same thing. There's a lot of humor in there too. So I don't think that having humor in there is necessarily a problem.
I don't think so either.
It's just more for me is what was muddled about it is the messaging and the characterization, and also it's trying to harken back to a time where the idea of a sociopath was very, very unfamiliar, and so that Michael was this unknown evil that acted for no reason, this little kid that turned on his sister for no reason, that was perhaps just born bad, is a very, very idea of than we have today of kind of mental health. And it opens in basically what would look like literal bedlam, right? Which was the really torturous mental health facility. It is a nightmare the way these patients are treated and the way they are depicted on screen. It is really toxic view, not just with Michael in the opening sequence in this hospital that's supposed to be the nice hospital where they're chained in this strange sort of chess game, and this is meant to be the nice hospital, and look how they're treated. But then add to that, there's a character in the film, a psychologist, whose behavior is completely devoid of logic, absolutely a plot device that makes no sense, and it is one of the movie's, I think, biggest failings.
That character, I agree.
How they treat mental health and the idea of what Michael is or is not.
Well, that I didn't. I mean, I honestly, I don't think the movie allowed me a chance to really bump on that. But I agree, it is sort of an antiquated view of that area, particularly of mental health care. But the doctor character who is in this film, there are things that happen in and around him that it adds to there are a number of things in this movie, scenes, characters, plot devices, and plot twists
that make no sense.
That not only do they make no sense, they could be excised from the movie completely, and it would not change one thing about the film. And I think that, and it ties back into my thing with the humor in the movie as well, which is that, of course, I think horror movies can have funny moments in them, but I think the best ones have a flow to them, and the humorous moments come where it makes sense, and they don't seem odd or out of place, and the scary moments come in where they should, and they don't seem odd or out of place. And that was my big thing, was these elements are present, and I think presented in the right order or presented with the right construction, it can be a roller coaster. This feels like a very herky-jerky car ride where it'll floor and then slam on the brakes, and then floor and then slam on the brakes, and then you'll turn and you don't know why you're turning. And so the whole movie, just for me, none of it felt like it came together at all until you get to the end. And even in the end, there is a great sequence that, you know, if you've seen the trailers, you probably know about around the kind of thing that I'm talking about, that it's setting this up, and you get a glimpse of sort of this Laurie and Michael showdown, but even that takes some turns, and by the end of that, you don't get the moment that I think you need out of that. I think that this is another franchise reboot that is being sold as one thing, and it's not. And I think that the whole movie even is building up to this one thing that never comes.
Well, my understanding, I think they reshot the end too.
Wouldn't shock me, if I'm being honest.
The last 11 minutes. But I think you're right in the sense that it's very disjointed in a number of ways. There's not a lot of logic to the way the characters are behaving. I mean, it's really, really divorced of logic in the sense that there's a police officer, for example, who behaves, he never calls for backup. He just seemingly is the only cop in the town, even though we see other police officers. He does, I don't want to spoil anything, but every action he takes makes less sense than the one prior. And then add to that is this idea of Laurie herself. The movie removes the one motive that makes her relationship with Michael make sense, that they're related. Because in the first movie, it's really very simple. Michael sees her
outside of his house,
starts following her, and then continues to follow her and kills all of her friends because they're in the area, right? That's how he gets fixated on her. in this movie, I have no bloody idea how he's happening upon the very people that are tying the narrative together. There's no reason that he should bump into the very people that are tying the narrative together. And it's one plot trick after another to get him and Laurie together. One awkwardly placed together plot trick after the other, including the completely bonkers bananas behavior of this therapist just to get Michael to Laurie.
Well, and I think, and that for me is why the movie as a whole doesn't work, despite having it has some very clever nods to the first film that are executed really well. I think fans of the first movie are going to appreciate a lot. There's a few lines. I mean, and Jamie Lee Curtis, I think, is the standout in this movie. She's great. But it's everything around that just doesn't make any sense, because it's not just Laurie and Michael. It's Laurie and Michael. There's a doctor. There's two journalists. There's Laurie's daughter. There's her daughter. There's her daughter's husband. There's her daughter's friends. There's the cops. And all of these characters that ultimately, in the large picture, many of them don't matter, and it seems like filler. It doesn't. It is not in service of a story, and I think that's where the film lost its focus. It had the Laurie and Michael conflict, which they knew they needed, but it doesn't have any idea of how to get there or what to do around it, and that's where it gets lost in the weeds for me.
And I think the other thing for me is, and people might not know this, I think speaks to the muddled nature of sort of what this film is trying to do. I think this is a fan of Halloween, and I am
this
too.
Is a fan
that's writing a love letter,
Yeah.
but not just to Halloween, the first movie, to the franchise. In a little way, the movie's trying to have its cake and eat its too, and say, well, we're divorcing ourselves of every movie that came after Halloween. That said, if you watch this movie and you've seen those other movies, it is straight up homaging in polite terms and lifting in other terms, entire sequences and moments and elements from every single Halloween movie that followed that first film, including Season of the Witch, which doesn't even have anything to do with Michael Myers. So that to me speaks to sort of wanting to have your cake and eat it too. I think what works well and what this movie does well that fans actually might enjoy, because I know probably a lot of people will enjoy this movie, and a lot of people are enjoying this movie, and you guys might love this movie and be mad at us right now.
Oh, I'm getting ready for it.
I'm prepared for that too, but I will say this: what I understand about that, on a visceral level, is that because it is a love letter, it is a really well-crafted send-up to those movies and to Halloween in particular. There are some great sequences of intense tension, including this final one with Laurie and Michael at the end.
The third act is a lot of it, most of it is pretty strong.
It's very strong. It's incredibly well put together. It's full of tension. It does play with the tropes. It plays with the archetypes of the genre and deconstructs them. The problem is we've already seen that now with Scream and the movies that followed. And I think it does those. It has some Hallmark horror movie, schlocky slasher horror movie moments that will be thrilling and enjoyable to watch. I think it's a fun movie to watch, especially that final sequence that's trying to turn the final girl and what Laurie Strode birthed on its head and kind of put a stamp on that. I think it could have done it, that same thing, in a less on-the-nose manner. You know, I think they basically, at a certain point, Laurie turns to the audience, or one of the characters basically turns to the audience and says, that moment in 1978 would define her life. And, you know, and like, I think you could have done it in a much more subtle manner that would have led to the same result, that same thrilling third act. It ends on such a high note that I think you leave the theater feeling good. But when you really stop and think about what the movie is doing, it doesn't totally gel and come together.
This felt to me like a fan film that managed to get everybody back that was in the original. But wasn't able to really recapture anything of what made it special to begin with, other than the presence of Jamie Lee Curtis, which, by the way, gets you like 70% of the way there. They couldn't close that gap for me. And I really struggled with this, because I do know that there are going to be people that I talk to. A lot of them are friends in the critical community. They looked at me like I was crazy when I said that I didn't really know how to feel about it. And I'm still torn in the sense that there's some really strong stuff in there. And I think there's enough strong stuff that there's going to be a lot of people that connect to this movie and really like it and think that it is a worthy follow-up for Halloween. And I'm glad that it works on that level for them. But I want to be sitting here and saying that it did that for me, and it didn't. And so I can't recommend a movie because I wanted it to work, and I can't recommend a movie because I think other people will like it. I can only go by what it did for me, and for me, this was a really, really mixed bag, and the strong stuff that was in it could not overwhelm the stuff that didn't work for me. So, my word on this movie is going to be that I think it's going to make a lot of money, and I think a lot of people are going to like it, and a lot of people are going to comment and tweet and say you're crazy. That's fine. I can only be true to how a movie hit me, and this just didn't do it for me, and I'm sad to say that, and I really, really, really wanted this to be the exclamation point on that original Halloween that it's been looking for, that they tried 20 years ago with the first time they did this reboot thing with Jamie Lee Curtis and didn't quite get there. I wanted this to be that, and it still wasn't that for me, and man, it's tough. I'm disappointed, if I'm being honest. I wish that I had come down another way on this one.
I would say I do think that if you are a fan of the horror genre, look, I'm a huge fan of Halloween. I think it's my favorite horror movie in certain respects of its ilk, right? It is the quintessential slasher movie, and
I agree.
So I think that it's an entertaining movie to watch, that it takes some big swings, that it connects in some areas, that certain aspects of the movie really work in terms of the craftsmanship, in terms of what it's trying to do with the genre, how it's trying to turn Halloween on its head. I think it does that in some respects, in terms of I wish it had chosen one lane and stayed there. But the script and the story got away from them, and plot is driving this movie. Character is not really driving this movie, and it's a shame because in the character of Laurie Strode, that should be driving the whole movie. And I think there was a way to do that, and it just got away from them.
And for people that say, "Oh, lighten up," like, what do you want every horror movie to be character driven? The original Halloween is character driven, and the best horror movies are character driven.
Yeah.
It's when you get away from that and it just becomes cheap scares and kills that I think you go into the more generic lane, which is where I think this movie sets for a lot of it.
And I think when you're thrown out by a movie because of the illogical behavior and turns that the characters are making that are not born of characterization but are completely born of a plot need,
Yes,
and you can
device,
tell that it is, you're thrown out of the movie. You're thrown out of the reality, and that way it's a less of a thrill ride. That said, there are exaltant moments in this movie. I walked out with the feeling it probably wanted me to have after that final 11 minutes, and it is trying to comment on the genre, but it's trying to comment on the genre and write a love letter to the genre
And be it, and
be
laugh at
the
it.
genre and laugh at the genre and do a send-up on the genre and do a send-up of all of the other movies in the franchise without not connecting to all the other movies. It's trying to do too many things at once, and I think that is ultimately collapses underneath of it, leaving it less than a masterpiece, but perhaps an entertaining time at the theater. If you do like horror movies, if you do like horror Halloween, certainly something that's interesting to watch. For me, it is a swing and a miss, but that I would still say you may ultimately end up enjoying.
No, I think my guess is that that's kind of why I'm warned. I want to be one of you. I want to be one of a lot of the people that I think are going to go this and have a really good time. I wish I was that person. I wish I could have done that with this film, and I didn't.
I'll tell you, I left the theater when I was teetering. I left the movie theater teetering more towards enjoyment after that final sequence, and then I thought about it, and I said, you know what? I don't think this movie ultimately really works on a lot of different levels. But I don't enthusiastically not recommend it. I think.
Oh, I don't either. Just because I can't recommend it personally, just because I can't say like this is not something that worked for me. I would not dissuade anyone from going to see it.
Yeah, I think horror fans. I think a lot of fans of Halloween really will enjoy this movie.
I think so too.
I just wish it had been better.
Yeah, me too. Oh well.
Oh well. Onward.
Roth, I think unless plans change later this week, we're going to do, or I think I'm going to do a little roundup of some of the smaller films that are opening both this week and are already in theaters that you can look at. And then we've got some big ones coming up. Bohemian Rhapsody coming up. We've got all the holidays, the Creeds and the Aquamans and everything else still ahead of us.
Fantastic Beasts.
Yes. We already know where to find them.
Yeah. They're right here in my heart.
There you go. Perfect. Thanks for watching. Have a spooky good time. Let us know what you thought of the movie, as always. And
it's just an opinion.
Yeah. We'll see you next time.